How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar, and today Benjamin Morse is joining me to talk about his new project that is being funded on Zoop. So, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Um, so tell me a little bit about yourself, and then we can talk about your graphic novel. Like, what
Yeah,
uh,
sure.
what have you worked on, and what is this exactly? What is the August book?
Okay. I've been an artist ever since I got out of college. It's what I went to school for.
Hmm.
I always have loved comics, and my mental goal was always to be there. I do graphic design and other illustration, video animation stuff during the day, and have always just been working on comics in the background. I've done a few smaller projects here and there, and some collaborations with other writers and artists. And about 10 years ago, I really just started to develop things for myself, write them myself. Just kind of try and take some time and figure out the writing process to go with the art, and kind of came about it that way. And as far as August, this is the first story I started developing, really, that I saw through to completion. I've always had some ideas
Hmm.
I've been bouncing around, but it's basically it's kind of a sci-fi action story. It takes a lot of elements from 80s cartoons and franchises like the Transformers and Star Wars and He-Man, and remixes a lot of those things and visuals into something I hope is going to be fun for audiences now, especially if you're a reader that has that like nostalgia bug and likes to go back to the old things. This is hopefully a way to get you that, but also something new and a chance to kind of follow along with something for the first time as well.
And you said this is your first graphic novel?
It is, yeah. I worked. We actually released this one later because of the pandemic, but this was completed. The bulk of it
Mhm.
was worked on, completed in 2020. And then you've seen, I hope, a lot of the back matter in the book. I had been working on it for about 10 years, so I have a lot of previous drafts, a lot of design sketches and things like that, that had all kind of been done from 2011 up till the book was done. We kind of
Mhm.
held up for the pandemic and everything, had a bit of a publisher switch, and in the meantime worked on We Are Scarlet Twilight, which I did on Kickstarter and finished on Zoop, which did pretty well, and is also in stores from Red 5 now if you're getting those in the direct market. So August was created first, but came out second.
Okay. And it, you have published these books before, is that right? Like in single issues or in
Yeah,
web comics? Okay, tell me a little bit about that.
yeah. So we published through Red 5 in 2022
Okay.
uh, in the direct market. So they're the 4 issues of that are out there, and I kind of wanted to. We're probably going to do a collection. We have to figure that out logistically. But the collection we're going to do for the direct market is going to be just the stories, maybe a couple of covers if we need to fill out pages. They want to keep that as kind of just basic as possible for the direct market version. And that opened up, I think, a cool opportunity to do a crowdfunded book that has, like I said, I've been working on this for so long. I have a ton of extra artwork, and it was a good way to give that stuff a home, to kind of let you see a little bit of the things that I kind of went through and developed, roads I went down as I was creating this world and building it out. So that was definitely why we wanted to create something that was like a big, nice hardcover, over 200 pages, just had all sorts of stuff, and really kind of brought you along from how I started developing this, how the character was, how it changed to the final story.
So you mentioned that this has a lot of influence from cartoons
Mhm.
and a lot of sci-fi. And looking through here, through your art, I don't know if you're going to take this as a compliment or not, but it really reminds me a lot of Rick Leonardi's artwork. I'm a
Oh,
big fan of his art.
I'm a big fan too.
Okay, cool, cool, cool. And you never know how people are going to
No
take it.
one's going to be offended by that comparison.
Okay. Yeah, I really dig it. The designs, the art, the layout, it's solid. And to say that this was your first work that is now being published and then now going into hardcover format. And what made you decide to do this as a collection in hardcover and to go the Zoop route?
Well, like I said, we had, I just had so much extra stuff that
Mhm.
I think really does add to the experience, to the story. And I think that there's something really cool. I've got all these hardcovers of art books, stuff from He-Man, stuff from Transformers, Batman stuff. And in a lot of ways, I'd find myself over the years reading those more than, say, some of the comics I have. Those are just really a part of my experience with those characters and those stories. It really is another dimension of it, and that's why I really wanted to do something like that. A lot of the artwork I've done for August that's in the book, and well, they're all in the book, but in the comic, the main story was really intended to try and, and I'm pretty overt about it, but to fool you a little bit into thinking this was something that was around in the 80s and you kind of just forgot about it. Like, oh yeah, the Centurions, or, the Silverhawks, something that was not as well known. I wanted to kind of create that feeling that it had a little bit of history to it by producing a lot of artwork that looked like it was from the 80s and some from the 90s. And that's the kind of thing that I really wanted to have a place for, and that's why I wanted to do the hardcover. Just to give you that like added thing where you're going to go through that art book and read about what was going on with some of the characters initially, how they changed. There's a lot about characters in there I'll probably use in different chapters of August's story later on that we kind of go through and that aren't in the main story, but you get to learn a little bit about them. And I hope it just kind of expands the world a little bit and gives you kind of another dimension of like, experiencing these characters and the kind of universe they live in. And another thing is, I mentioned I'm a graphic designer, and I look at some of the books on my shelf, especially Chip Kids, and the design in them is so beautiful. I don't know if that stuff gets talked about quite enough. I look at those Alex Ross books or some of the Batmanga, some of the other stuff he's done with DC, and his design just makes those stories cooler to me. It makes it a more just a better experience. It's like seeing a movie in a dingy theater with, where it's too cold or something and it's dirty and nasty. It's just not fun, versus seeing it in like Alamo Drafthouse where it's cool and you can order whatever you want. It's just a great way to go and do that thing. So that's kind of what I wanted to do with the hardcover, is just, have a chance to do some really fun, solid 80s inspired design. Give you, all this other background of the world, the way some of the planets they go to looked initially, how they evolved, how the characters looked initially. Some of the plot lines that different characters had were very different in the final version. And that was also just fun to kind of share with people, because some of those things are, pretty relevant to the story, and kind of, I think knowing that extra stuff just gives you a little bit more when you go back and read the book again.
So, okay, tell me a little bit about the book. What's the pitch?
So
it's August, so I assume that might be the character's name. Of course,
it is the character's name. Yeah,
I did read a little bit of it, so I'm cheating. But go ahead, tell me the pitch.
Sure. So Captain August is a kind of classic sci-fi space opera hero. He's very much in a tradition of Johnny Quest or Luke Skywalker, or Dick Grayson, Robin, sort of the stand-up all-American guy who's a little on the young side. It's his story, and he was kind of this celebrated hero everyone loved. He gets involved in this big battle during a galactic civil war and destroys Mars, which is not really his fault, but he ends up getting blamed for it. So he kind of goes from being a really well-liked figure to a very controversial, problematic figure pretty quickly. And he's trying to find a way, as this war winds down, to stay in the service. He realizes he's not going to be able to do that, and starts taking on more and more dangerous missions to buy himself a little more time. And in the course of doing that and being a little reckless, he finds out that a lot of his old enemies he thought were gone are not nearly as gone as he thinks. So it's basically his adventure in trying to carve out a new path for himself and deal with a lot of villains and things that have happened in his past.
And how long is this journey? How long is this book here?
Oh, so the main story is 4 issues, and I think runs a little bit over 100 pages. I expanded a little bit of the pacing for the hardcover. There was some things in the intro that we had to keep the page count down in the published floppy version that I kind of gave a little bit more breathing room in the hardcover, which is the way I initially had it. So that part of the 1 through 4 story is a little over 100 pages. I've got a 13-page prequel that's made up of a few different drafts of the initial series. That's a kind of a deleted scene, which is pretty fun. I've got a few pages of just things about where the story's going, as far as like August's life and other adventures he's going to have. And I've got about 100 pages of back matter, which is like all that stuff I did when I was developing it. So it's kind of an art book and gave me a chance to really show off some of this artwork I liked that hadn't been published, but also to just kind of flex my graphic design muscles a little bit and have fun in that way. So I think the whole thing clocks in at, I want to say, 208 pages.
Now, is this something you want to see continue into another volume, or is this an all in one and done? Or how would you describe this particular character and his adventures?
Well, I'm definitely going to keep going with them. One of the other reasons I want to do this collection is to really try and get the word out about this one a little more.
Mm-hmm.
This is my favorite character. I loved working on We Are Scarlet Twilight. I love working on some of the things I've collaborated with other artists and writers with, but this is my favorite character, and I'm going to stay with him a long time. So one of the cool things about the collection is I got the chance to do like a really cool spine, and I want to make sure, when we do further installments of these, we keep all that consistent. So hopefully this is the first of at least 4 volumes that are going to look really nice all together on your shelf. Mm-hmm. And I've actually started working on, I have basically 4 main stories for him mapped out. And I may go in, if I do finish those, I may go in and explore different parts of his life, in different formatted runs. But basically there's going to be 4 books like this one. Mm-hmm. And the next one is actually going to be 50 years later, and it's going to be the last of those 4. So it's sort of a Dark Knight Returns look at the character. It's 50 years in the future. The galaxy's almost deserted and lifeless. A lot of bad things have happened. And we kind of catch up with what happened to August, where he is while these events are going on, and what he's going to do about it. So it's what I think is going to be fun about that is I had all these stories planned out. Purgatory Underground is part 1, and that's the one that's live now. Mm-hmm. And I just thought as I was coming up with plot points and taking notes, I always found myself going to the last story, the part 4. And I thought about that, and I was actually thinking about how I read Batman in the 80s. I read Dark Knight Returns and I read Year One, and it was kind of like the beginning and the end of that version of Batman, his story. And it gave the issues I was reading at the time just a lot more, I would say, gravity. I knew that Dark Knight Returns wasn't exactly canon, but I liked reading those issues, especially like the Legends of the Dark Knight stuff that Denny O'Neil was doing. It felt like it was part of that world. It felt like the character had some context because he had a beginning, and then more importantly, an end that you had sort of in your head. And I thought about a lot of characters that that are legends. Robin Hood, everybody knows how he got started, and he fights the sheriff, and then he dies and shoots the arrow at the end. King Arthur, we know the beginning, we know the end. And I thought that actually makes a lot of sense. I think that our experience with a lot of these archetypal heroes is we know the beginning, we know the end. And it's a little unusual that a lot of our characters that we have in comics, we kind of have a beginning, we have, and we kind of keep them frozen at, sometimes age 20 or age 30. And we don't really have a definitive canon end in mind. And I don't necessarily think that we need one. But I really liked that idea of when I'd sit down and read those comics in the 80s and 90s for Batman, it just felt like it had a lot more. It just existed on some continuum that made it a lot more fun for me to read. So I decided, hey, I'm going to do the last one next. And I think it's going to hopefully, knowing I was going to do that, and I'd go back and look at like parts 2 and 3 and thought, wow, there's some chances, knowing that how the galaxy ends up in part 4, how August ends up in part 4. I think there's some things I can do in part 2 and 3 that are in the middle of his life that will be a lot more suspenseful, because you're like, oh, is that thing going to happen to him? Is this where this goes down? Is this where, something happens to this character and that's why they're not around? I hope that gives it a lot more chances to create suspense and make you worry about some of these characters. They're not necessarily going to win in the end. And you're going to hopefully want to see like, oh, wow, is this where this all goes down, sort of thing. So definitely going to do more of it. And like I said, I think the next chapters are going to be pretty similar to this. They're going to be 4 issues, pretty much akin in terms of pacing to, like a 90-minute, 2-hour movie. And that's the plan for now.
I love the extras in the back of this book with those trading cards that are right out. Oh, dude, I feel like you and I kind of like the same things. Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but these are definitely homages to the Marvel
Yeah,
Series 1 and it looks like just from the font and the layout, the X-Men
yeah,
Series 2.
X-Men Series 2. Yep, that's the
And
one.
okay, dude, this is so cool. Okay, okay, cool. Um, and yeah,
It's well, it's funny how I've shown those to people, and I didn't remember. I remembered those layouts. I really loved them.
mhm.
And like I said, I'm trying to create stuff like this with these characters to kind of make you feel. I mean, it's a fun homage, and I think it would be fine just to do it for that reason. But I'm also kind of trying to make you feel like these guys have been around for a long time, to kind of hit that nostalgia trigger a little bit in your brain. And like I said, I'm pretty overt about that, but I think it does kind of broaden things out. But the memories people have of those cards, and I have them too, obviously. I'll show those to people like, oh, that's X-Men Series 2. That reminds me of this exact card. I mean, people know all the details about that stuff. And it was one of those things that made being a comic book fan in the 90s, the early 90s, just so much fun. Those card sets were great. They were exciting to look at. They were really fun to collect. And I'm surprised at the response I've gotten with those, because those are something I think
Oh,
people
now
really, that's the stuff
you
that's
all
running through our veins.
you always remember your X-Men cards. I
Yeah,
always say
yeah,
that.
you
You
do.
may not remember
Absolutely.
your first kid or second kid being born, but you always remember your X-Men cards. So it's really nice to see those in here. Um, so we talked a little bit about the story, but I wanted to see if you had any internal artwork to show people to kind of get an idea
Yeah,
of
sure.
your style. Because while we have this right here, this mock-up of the
Mhm.
hardcover, I don't think it really does it justice. Because, like I said, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Rick Leonardi and some Stuart Eminem. And then I saw some
Yeah,
things in there because I had the privilege to read the book itself. Um, you did some variant covers that are like Youngblood and
yeah.
Johnny Quest, just things like that, dude. It's so cool. Okay, here we go.
Mhm. Okay, so this is actually the first artwork page of the book,
There we go.
and you're definitely right. Stuart Immonen is, I think, probably he's certainly one of my favorite current artists working, and I think that he does get talked about a lot, but I don't think he gets quite as much A-list credit as he deserves. I think that guy does everything a comic artist needs to do better than anybody. His layouts are amazing. He can do things really simply. He can do things that are very rendered out, and it all works. It's really consistent. His storytelling's amazing, and his drawing is just off the charts. Every character he's great at the likenesses. His gestures are amazing. I mean, I could talk about that all day. The way he spots like the shadows and light, he's just a master, and that's definitely somebody who's almost always, on my other monitor, I'm looking at some stuff while I'm drawing, like thinking like, yeah, I need to figure out a way to do something like that, or so he's definitely a huge influence on me, and was a big influence on these pages that I'm showing you. So I can kind of just take you through um, some of the pages here.
Yeah,
These were,
take us on a journey. Now, one thing to just let people know though, you are the writer and artist.
I am, yeah.
Okay, so when you say artist, what exactly does that mean for you? Like for people that are tuning
Oh,
in.
okay. Yeah. So in this case, it's everything. I've done everything on this book, from writing to sending it to the printer. So lettering, coloring, all that stuff, that's all me.
You are insane.
It's a lot to do. You,
It's
you
a
find
lot.
you find ways to make it work. And I'm lucky enough that I've had a lot of great mentors in the commercial art stuff I do. That is that have taught me a lot of tricks and ways to do that in ways that obviously would be faster just to do the artwork and have someone color it and letter it. But there are
Absolutely,
ways.
yeah.
Yeah, I have found efficiencies, in like, okay, if I draw it out in this way, I'm saving myself a little bit of time on flatting. Nexian, what's up? How's it going? He also has a campaign out that's doing pretty well. But
Oh, nice, nice, nice. I like hearing that.
and yeah, but it is certainly more work, but I've found ways over the years to make it somewhat manageable, and to do the drawing in ways that are going to make the coloring a little bit easier in the long run. But a lot of this stuff, it would be hard not to do everything For instance, this scene is one that I've been looking forward to doing when I had actually finally done it for a long time. Is I'm a big Transformers the movie fan, and I love the interiors of like the Autobots,
Autobot
Teletran.
City?
Yeah, well, that too. That does kind of keep the same color scheme, but
Yeah,
the
I can see that.
Teletran one was always orange, and everything was shiny.
Mhm.
That ship that they are in Transformers the movie, when Megatron kind of takes over and kills, let's say Ironhide and Ratchet and some other guys, which was
Some
really
other
traumatizing.
guys, dude, that was Brawn and Prowl.
Was it? Yeah, God, that was. I remember seeing that when I was a kid, and I was just like,
Yeah,
because they died like horribly. It was rough.
horribly. Yeah, people don't understand.
Their
That's when
eyes
nature.
burned out and stuff, and I was just like, I think we were. My mom took me and my brother and some friends to see it. Somebody was. I wasn't crying because I'm very tough, but uh,
Dude,
somebody was
that's
crying.
when our childhood died.
Yeah, and I remember my mom. I think about this a lot because I'm like, my mom was just like probably watching this movie, like, what in God's name did I drag my kids into?
Why
Optimus
are they
Prime is being beaten
crying?
to death. I mean, it was like you go expecting to see what you'd think was going to be like a Pixar movie or something in terms of scope,
Right.
and it gets heavy. But yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons that movie and that franchise has stayed around so long and made the biggest impact, I'd say, of any '80s cartoon, is because everybody everybody had their favorite. Everybody liked He-Man and Voltron, and I'm no exception to that. But everybody had that event where they saw that movie that was into the Transformers and was just traumatized by it. So you have this added sort of thing in your head, I think, that made it stick a little better. But in the
Yeah.
movie, the way they had those backgrounds, that in the cartoon they were nice, but they weren't as done up as the versions of the backgrounds and the animation and shading you see in the movie, because they just had obviously a better budget to work with. But I
Yeah.
really wanted this scene to look like that interior where it's gold and shiny, and I'd been looking forward to doing that for a long time. So some of these are I would say a lot of these are some of my favorite panels in the book, for that reason, is I really wanted to get in there and do an environment that felt like that in comics, because I don't think I've seen a lot, of like bold yellow backgrounds that aren't something painted that way to fight Green Lantern, or some plot contrivance.
You would
And
have to look into European comics that have those color textures
yeah,
usually, but yeah, not so
but
much so like
Mobius does that a lot. Yeah.
not so much so like the American comics. You're a self-taught artist, or did you go to school? Did you train under anybody? Like you said you went to school for um
Mhm.
like
Yeah, I went to Cleveland Institute of Art, so
okay.
I'm pretty trained, I guess, and had a really good art program in high school. I went to a high school called Moeller in Cincinnati, and they have an excellent art program. So, had really good foundational teaching, I'd say, at every step. And then when I got out of college, I started working in an illustration studio called Phoenix Advertising Art. That kind of eventually folded into what I still do for my day job, as that kind of changed a little bit. But I had some great teachers there who were guys that had just been doing commercial art for decades. Were really good at digital stuff, really good at practical stuff. And I learned, I've heard it said a lot of times, from different artists, that you're going to learn more in 6 months of your real job than you will in 6 years of schooling. And that's absolutely true. So I always had great teachers that would teach me, how to handle the business side of things, significantly, but also, oh, when you're drawing this type of illustration, you should do it this way. When you're doing this type of thing, here's a trick to do it that way. So I always had great teachers in that sense. And I think that as comics are concerned, uh, I've had teaching in commercial art and drawing and all that stuff. The comic
Mhm.
stuff, I didn't really ever have a comic class I went to.
That's what I
Yeah,
meant. You mentioned advertising
yeah,
earlier, but
hmm,
that's a little bit or sometimes a lot different than sequential art.
yeah.
What you're doing here, and hell, man, some of the best artists are self-taught artists.
Oh yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
this is one of my favorite pages that you did, by the way.
Yeah, I love that because I always wanted, like one of the things when I sort of planned this series out is I think back at like the lunch boxes I had when I was a kid that had like a million Transformers just going to war with each other and stuff. And there'd be a lot of those. They just looked, or Earl Norham's He-Man paintings are a great example too. I mean, these things were just epic, and I wanted everything to look like that when I had a chance to. Whatever, obviously I needed the plot to be what it is, so I couldn't have a gazillion guys running around, or it wouldn't have made much sense. But I always wanted these things to kind of look like really cool versions of objects that might be toys or battle sets or something like that you'd get when
Mhm.
you were a kid, because I kind of wanted to take, from a story point of view, I wanted to take something like that was a pretty simplistic good versus evil ongoing, franchise, and not necessarily darken it up, but make it a little more mature, make it, sort of take it from G to sort of like the PG-13 sort of thing you'd see in an Indiana Jones movie, not like super dark or deconstructionist, but just a more like cinematic experience of those things. And that was a really good way for me to get my brain around how I was going to approach the visuals and design things. I always wanted to look like simple shapes, and I'd find different ways to add detail to them that still worked within like a pretty simple skeleton as far as the way the shapes were of each object were kind of put together. So that was a lot of fun to do, and it made it very easy for me to figure out when I kind of had, well, I could go this way with this or I could go that way. I had kind of a framework in my head to say, okay, I'll make it simple in this way, and the details will come from this type of thing. Like I'll have the details and the texture, sort of the stuff you'd see on these ships, and I'd always want to make sure they weren't. If I was like, well, how much color changes should they have on them? And I'd always try and make that pretty simple, because if you look at those old toys, you'd have like, maybe 4 different colors of plastic, and that would be it. And I always wanted to make it look like it could have been kind of a more complicated drawing of those things. And hopefully it worked out. I don't know if that necessarily comes across when you look at it,
You're
but
yeah, well, I was gonna say that this is one of my favorite pages because of the ships. They
Mhm.
really stand out, and dude, this is like it reminded me of an anime I used to watch as a kid called Captain Future.
Captain Future.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was I don't think it made it here in America. I'm originally from Peru, and so we got a lot of
Okay.
anime down there that didn't unfortunately make it here. But very Captain Harlock, so a little bit of
Oh,
like
okay. Yeah.
Leiji Matsumoto's
Mhm.
artwork, but really like the design of the ships. Is what I was gonna say, and somebody was commenting in the comments here.
Oh, yeah.
Cool looking ships. The Starscream.
Appreciate it. Yeah, if your Starscream is your name, you're obviously a Transformers guy. I hope that, I hope these things look like they could have been on the same block of programming that in the '80s the Transformers and GI Joe and all that stuff were. And like I always, like I said, it made it hard. I'm not a trained writer by any stretch, so there's a lot of things I think that you probably, if you've learned how to write in a creative writing class, or majored in it or something like that, they probably kind of lay out, well, here's how you generally want to approach a story, here's how you want to try and tie things together. And that was something I had to learn myself, and kind of approaching this like, okay, my guiding, plan here is to be like '80s cartoon but updated to be, kind of an action adventure movie. That gave me kind of, like I said, I get to a fork in the road and know, okay, I'm always trying to get back to this direction, and reinforce this type of point, instead of just taking it any which way. And that kind of narrowed down the choices I had to make in a way that I could work with.
So,
Probably if I was a trained writer, I would just know how to do that, but it's not the
well,
case.
that was what I was gonna say though. This being something that you're doing all on your own, including the lettering, um, that's just amazing. Did you try to get help? Like, did you get an editor? Like, try to get somebody to edit, or
Mhm.
you did it all in house?
Yeah, I did. When I was first developing it, I was showing it to a couple other writer friends just for feedback, and they had some
Mhm.
interesting ideas I didn't really go with, or in some cases, I'd be like, I don't like that idea," but I'd end up doing something that was informed by that, but like the complete opposite take on it, or something like that.
Right.
And I had a great editor named Nicole DeAndrea at the original publisher for August,
Okay.
who kind of went through and did dialogue passes, and actually taught me some things about lettering, kind of when you have a character that's being quoted off panel, things that I didn't necessarily pick up just from reading comics correctly, that she pointed out. That was a really big help to have as well. But yeah, everything else is all me, for better or worse.
You are a madman, sir, but I love it. That is why you're in comics, though. It's
This is
it
true.
it takes a mad mind to be doing things like this, and Yeah, I love this is a it's nice to look at some of this behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, and
Now,
I can kind of fast forward through the story here a little bit to show off some of the
I wanted
design and
I
the
wanted to
interior.
show, yeah, this is the kind of
Mhm,
stuff that I love. The
mhm,
back matter to books, I'm one of these people that if I'm going to get a hardcover,
mhm.
I want to get as much back matter as possible. And there, and people are split, right? Some people are like,
Yeah,
I just want the story. And others are like, no, give me the extras are what makes limited edition video games and Blu-rays and 4K
yeah.
movies to me completely worth it. It's why I get those.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
I think for, big hardcover editions, omnibus editions, like back matter to me is really what's important. So
yeah.
you have quite a bit because I was looking through here and there's a lot of cool things in here. Not just concept art, but like variant covers and the trading cards, which
Mhm.
that was really cool to look through.
Yeah, I had a lot of different covers, some that were used, some that weren't, and
Mhm.
it was fun to show those off. I have this prequel story, which I'll fast forward through pretty quick because I don't want to give it all away. I have this other, and like you said, I love the back matter stuff too. I wanted to throw as much of that in there. I've had all these great books on my shelf forever that give you background on the artwork, the writing process, how just really broadens the world of say Batman or He-Man or any of those franchises in a way I've always enjoyed. And like I said, that's always been like kind of my go-to stuff when I revisit those characters and want to read them. So it was kind of fun to show off some of that stuff. And like I said, I have so much of it too from developing it for so long that it was great to give it a home. And I have another page here where I kind of show off the main four stories I'm going to do with them.
Mhm.
If you're a Captain Harlock fan, part two is very Captain Harlock inspired, so I think you'll like that one.
All
And
right.
it's fun to show off some of that. And then the kind of back matter art book section is some black and white art, a lot of unused art. Some of this was on the left here is the initial design I did of them. That's I think the first drawing that I ever did
Nice.
of them.
Yeah, this is the kind of stuff I love. So this is like the first concept art that you were like, okay, I
Hmm.
think I got something here. And then
Yeah,
I love the evolution from that into the finished character.
yeah, yeah. And then the timeline here is I kind of arranged it to look good, but you kind of are seeing my first sketch of Captain August, and then one of the last pictures you see of him in the first story here, and it was kind of fun to do. I knew I wanted to do something that was pretty spaghetti western in terms of setting.
Definitely tell by
So
the character design there.
yeah, so I and it also really it kind of informed the story. I wanted to take somebody that's like Dick Grayson or Johnny Quest or Luke Skywalker and turn them into kind of a Clint Eastwood type guy. Make it like not necessarily like they're darker or anything like that, but they're a little more mature. And so that's kind of why that's why he has the haircut he has. I wanted to borrow
Mhm.
Luke Skywalker's haircut. And initially it was blonde, but I changed that thinking like, well, he can't have the same haircut and be blonde. And the red hair was actually kind of I thought, oh, I could kind of bring in some Archie in there too, give him the red hair and the freckles and anything I could do to make the character look like one of those, like Archie, like Johnny Quest, like young Luke Skywalker, and then see him go through all this stuff was for me, I thought a pretty good way to to get a little more story into the visuals instead of having it all be just action or dialogue that you're communicating through. So that was the idea there. And then obviously a lot of sketches here for different versions of the covers. And I've also done a lot of this like kind of throwback homage design stuff,
Yeah,
that
very
makes it like,
Mattel. I love this, man. This is like
yeah.
definitely, fan of you and I are both fans of He-Man.
Oh,
Uh
yeah.
so the Mattel the for people that didn't know this, and I'm sure most people probably watching this or watching this later, uh, yeah, in the '80s, that was the greatest time to grow up because of the
Yeah.
toys. It was the driving force of everything at the time, whether it was cartoons or movies. But sometimes it was the box art that sold
Oh,
us on
yeah.
toys.
Yeah.
The toy could be junk on the inside, but the freaking box art, oh my god! Especially what's his name? He just passed away this year. The guy that did the He-Man concept art.
Oh, was
Very
that Mark
inspired.
Taylor?
Yeah, Very inspired
Oh
by
yeah,
Frazetta, man.
yeah,
That guy killed it. But this is
yeah,
cool. This is very Star Warsy. I love it.
yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the fun of this. I looked back, looking at during all the time I was developing this, the Star Wars sequels came out, and a lot of other things that have been like, oh, we're bringing this back, and then fans online hate it. And I agree with some of those criticisms, and I disagree with others. But the main thing is that I took from it is we want this nostalgia, but we also don't want it to. We want it to evolve too, and sometimes those two goals are completely at loggerheads. In the case of Luke Skywalker and Last Jedi, everybody was upset like how he had ended up. But I thought to myself, from a story perspective, it had to be he had to like be out of the game in some way for some reason. Otherwise, there'd be no more space wars. I mean, they'd be on a beach somewhere. So I kind of thought like, all right, you need to find a way to do something that serves that need for the nostalgia and the history, and it gives you that part, but also gives you the feeling that you're getting something new, and getting something that can surprise you in the way that these things did when you saw them the first time. And that's the cool thing about doing this sort of throwback artwork is
Yeah,
I
these are
kind of
ones
want to
I was
want to
looking at.
yeah, I want to plant that stuff in your head a little bit and make you feel like it had been through a lot of those things. Like the cover on the right, I'm a huge Liefeld fan, but I also I had this kind of meta story in my head that this had been around in the 80s and had sort of been brought back a few times. Sometimes in ways that caught on and continued, and sometimes like they had that version of He-Man that lived in space and it just wasn't well received. And I kind of thought it would be fun to do a couple versions of him that were like the ones that didn't take off, that people look back and laugh at a little bit. Like the GI Joe Extreme was like really Frank Miller looking. It was like, wow, what is this? This doesn't seem like what people were looking for, sort of thing. So that was kind of in my head, the story of this cover on the right. It was like kind of a reboot of him in the 90s that was just a little bit too 90s. He's got and despite trying to make it look kind of ridiculous.
The prism cover, is that
Oh
what they
yeah.
called it? With a free trading card inside. Boy, they really did come for our wallets in the 90s with that stuff.
Oh
The
yeah.
main character has a small resemblance to Luke and also Paul Atreides, the character from Dune. Yeah, I can
Oh
kind of
yeah.
see that.
Yeah. I definitely wanted that haircut. That's just so that puts the character in such a narrow sort of era in terms of like that particular look. Because I knew I wanted to take the designs and make them look kind of like Battlestar Galactica, kind of like Star Wars, kind of like He-Man. But I really wanted to plant you in that time period as far as like this is when this character kind of came from. Like I said, I look at how we keep rebooting everything. We keep getting more and more Star Wars stuff, and everybody kind of is like, it sort of feels like we want two different things from it. And I kind of went about that backwards instead of bringing back something new, or figuring out a way to get to work on some of those things. Thought, why don't I create something that feels that way, and then I can build it around a story that builds upon that, and hopefully gives you that all those ingredients you're looking for, but does it in a way that doesn't trip up the sort of like, oh, I don't like what happened to Luke Skywalker. I don't like how He-Man was in the Netflix cartoon of it. Like doesn't trip over any of those sort of like story landmines as far as how you're going to go back to some franchise and see a new version of it.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I love all this old stuff. I mean, as much as this cover was supposed to be kind of like all the excesses of the 90s, like the hair and the headband and the shoulder pads, I'm like, that stuff is legitimately cool. I still like it. So it even
Same.
kind of ends up being fun
The
in
stuff
that
that I
regard.
loved when I was younger. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a closer look at the trading cards.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about earlier, these were just such a fun part of being a comic fan during that era that
Okay.
it's a blast to put together.
Okay, so I see Marvel Series 1. I see
Mhm.
X-Men Series 2. I think the August one on the right-hand side at the bottom, is that Marvel Series 3?
I think it is. I'm not as good on my series exactly, except for the X-Men one, which I knew was series 2. But
Yeah.
that was the one I had most of, where it had like the sort of galaxies in the background and the outlined characters with that kind of 80s,
Yeah,
90s. Like, I loved that series. That was my favorite.
yeah, but it was a lot of fun. Trading cards were part of the game if you were collecting
Yeah,
comics back then.
100%. And then the one on the top left that's a front and the back is the Batman 89 card set.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I was trying to see. I thought it was a Topps. I'm like, what is that? Okay, I can see it now. Oh,
Which those were one of my favorites too. I loved that.
yeah. I like the retro look to the back of the card.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that too. And then this is some looks at the villains. You can see if you've read some of the story, this is kind of a different look for some of these characters. So this is from a version I think a few years before the final version, and I had some of this art. Some of this artwork is just design sketches or concept art.
Mhm.
Some of it is stuff that was blow ups of parts that were pages in previous drafts, and this was like the part I really wanted to do with this book because I wanted to kind of create like a nice looking design, get some story information in there, give you a nice look at all the artwork. Because some of this stuff it would never really even get seen otherwise, but I like a lot of it, and it was fun to give readers like a look at some of this stuff, plot lines and characters that really weren't a part of the main story, or were very different in the main story, and just to show you some of that stuff. So, and you can see obviously my artwork approach changed a lot over the years until I found like the right style that I think fit the final version of the project. But it's great to be able to show off some of this, just get in there and show some details of the stuff. And there's some black and white pages in there too that I thought looked pretty cool. That I wanted to get to revisit a little bigger and show off. But
About how much of the main story is there in this book? Like how big is this book, for example, and then how much of it is extras?
oh, it's about half and half. So the main story is, like I was saying, about 103-4 pages, because my page count was a little over on the published issues. And then there's the back matter I went through. That's the cover gallery and that sort of timeline. It tells you a little bit more about the character, and then also the prequel story. And then there's about the remainder is all back matter. So it's almost half is the main story, half is extras. In the
Okay, that's awesome. I like that.
And initially, so when I first started writing this, it was going to be I was aiming for something like 12 issues. I wanted to really create something that was more like a season of television and less like a movie. So there was a lot of expanded plot lines, a lot of side stories I could have gone down that I was excited about doing. When I finally got a pitch accepted by a publisher, they said, "Well, it should be 4 to 7 issues if you can make that work." So I went to work on that, brought it down to 7 issues, and they said, "Actually, by 7, we really meant 4." And I said, "Okay." I did
Whoa.
that, and it was actually great. I've said this a bunch of times, but I'm really happy that that occurred. The cool thing about that was I like the idea of this really longer story where you can go down side quests and have kind of more character driven moments and things like that. But the 4 issues, when I laid that one out, I was like, wow, this really clicks, and it solved a lot of my problems as far as momentum was concerned. And I think the most important reason for that was, it keeps you dialed into August. It keeps you on his side kind of throughout the story, instead of like, okay, we're upset that this thing happened to him, but then we kind of sidetrack and we talk about this other character for a little bit. And then when we come back to him, we have to kind of mentally reacquaint ourselves just a little bit to where he was emotionally. And doing it in 4 issues, I mean, like I said, I'm gonna continue that format through the rest of the book, because I really like that structure. You can do something that's kind of like a 90-minute, 2-hour movie. And I've likened it to a roller coaster. It keeps you dialed into the main character. You're really following along the adventure with them. The ups and downs are paced at the right points, I think, in that format. And I'm really glad I had to do that, because once I kind of kept chipping away at it, that's when it really gelled. When I knew, I was like, yeah, this is really good. And I was resistant because there were some plot twists I really liked in the longer versions that I was trying to keep and kind of shoehorn in there. And when I realized I had to get rid of a couple of them, it kind of freed me up mentally to look at the whole story as a whole and say, okay, wait, here's how we need to feel here. Here's how we need to feel here. And really just, follow along with this character in a way that I think works a lot better, keeps the story momentum on the right track.
How long did it take you to do this? To put
So
everything
the published
together?
version, I think I got an accepted pitch in 2019,
Mhm.
and it took me a little over a year, I think, no, it was actually a little under a year to do the 4 issues, which is, writing, coloring,
You're crazy.
all that
You're to
stuff.
do 4 issues, man.
Yeah.
And you have a full-time job? Is that, did I hear that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I work, I mean, I work for myself. We're
Mhm.
freelance, kind of a small art and design firm.
Okay.
So I work from home. It's not like if I'm not busy one day, I can work on the comic, and that definitely makes it easier to do.
Got you. Okay. Any word of encouragement or advice that you would give somebody that's trying to do something similar, that has, dreams and ambitions to just become a comic book creator?
I would say, I mean, to be really succinct, just keep doing stuff and failing. The first versions of this, especially from a writing standpoint, were a mess. I
Mhm.
didn't have a good plan. I knew the type of story I wanted to do. I knew the type of character I wanted to create, and that wasn't enough to go on. I needed a larger canvas, kind of, and a much better plan to really sit down and be more efficient about how I plotted it out. Because, like I said, it took a long time to do this comic, much longer than it really should have from start to finish. If you look at all the time I spent developing it, and in a lot of ways, the longer it took to do, the harder it got to finish because I have little scenes here and there I'd fall in love with. So my advice would just be keep moving quickly, and you're going to learn more. You'll make mistakes that way, but I think you'll learn more, and ultimately your momentum in terms of being a comic creator is going to be a lot better if you just kind of keep at it, move on to the next page, go back and fix it if you absolutely have to, but keep moving on. Is
Mhm.
I would say my best advice there. I think I spent a lot of time with this kind of like, oh, I liked this about doing it this way, but I like that about doing it that way, and I didn't really have a good plan as far as like which route to take it down, and it cost me a lot of time. I have a lot of
Oh,
cool
okay.
artwork to show from it, which I like, but
Hey, that
um,
filled up the extras in the back.
yes, it did. Sure did.
What were your inspirations growing up? What were some of your favorite comics and anime and sci-fi movies or novels that you really enjoyed, that you were, or is there a particular comic book that you thought, that's what I want to do?
Oh
One day
yeah.
I want to do that.
I mean, I was always a Superman guy growing up, and then when Batman the movie came out in '89, I kind of liked Batman comics more, while probably liking the character of Superman more. So those are, always kind of what's kept me into comics. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, which is, I would think, pretty obvious from checking out the comic, and I definitely wanted to create something that um, took place in kind of a Star Wars type environment. But when I was a kid, I loved Voltron, probably more than any of those other cartoons.
Really,
Something about
Voltron,
that one, yeah, that
Li-
one just
Li-
really clicked with me.
Lion Force or Vehicle Team?
Oh no, the Lion Force. I like the vehicle team, but I was young, and I didn't exactly understand them, and it confused me.
Let's
I
confuse
didn't
it.
I didn't well, and it's weird. You watch documentaries about that stuff now on YouTube. They explain like, oh yeah, they
A
just had
different
these two.
series.
Yeah, they just
Yeah.
threw it together and dubbed it in a way that kind of made sense. And I think they did have a crossover movie that I only saw like last year. But yeah, I was a Lion Force guy, 100%, and I love the color of that. And it, like the lions just looked cool. They were great toys, and the cartoons were great. So that was something that really bled into August. I wanted, Star Wars is great. I mean, obviously Star Wars is perfect, but it's a little gray. As far as for a movie, that's exactly what it ought to be. For a
Mhm.
comic, I looked at Voltron, I looked at the Transformers. I kind of wanted that color, the vividness of all that stuff,
Okay.
and that's what kind of made its way into August, and like I said, guided my design choices. That was always my starting point, and then I'd say, oh, I want these guys to look like the Cobra Troopers, but this and this and this has happened to them. In fact, like it always would be like start with this, and however far that character needs to veer from that type of influence, I could kind of put that in the visuals, and it made everything a lot easier to approach doing it that way.
What are
But
your
yeah,
thoughts?
Voltron was
I
my
was
big
about
one.
to ask this too. What are your thoughts on the Netflix, the new show, the one that
I
came
only
out
watched like
2, 3 years?
one episode of it, and that's not a reflection on it. I just the one thing that I've mentioned, I do all this myself, and it makes it very hard to read new comics or watch stuff. So it's
Oh man,
yeah,
yeah.
you pretty much,
Oh wait,
if this is your side thing, that's there. It doesn't leave a room for a lot of other stuff.
as you're drawing, you don't. like put things in the? Do you listen to music as you
I
draw, or
listen to music, yeah, and
okay?
I'll put on movies that I've seen a million times,
Mhm.
so I don't necessarily need to watch it. Like, and that kind of helps because for this especially, a lot of the structure of the story itself, and certainly a lot of the action scenes, I really wanted to be like an Indiana Jones movie. I'm a huge fan of that, so I put that stuff on sometimes, and really, if I was at a point, especially if I'm sketching out layouts, I would just kind of look over at how many cuts Spielberg does, what because he has a very comic booky approach, especially in those early movies, to the action. He gives you, if Indiana Jones is reaching for something, it's like Indiana Jones's face, the thing, his hand, his face again, the bad guy. And I would try and like make notes of that and put as much of it as I could into an action sequence. At least I'd have to truncate it a lot, but it was that stuff I'll put on just to kind of keep it in my mind, and also kind of say like, okay, I want that energy there, I want that amount of tension there, and study it a little bit. But yeah, I can't like my wife will draw and watch like a new thing
Mhm.
that you have to follow along with the story and all that stuff, or like I could never do that. Like I could never watch something like Breaking Bad while I'm working, where you have to really be paying attention and follow along. So I have
Yeah,
to go back to the old stuff or just music.
that's fair. I'm always curious how people get mentally there, like
Mhm.
prepared to draw or to write. Um, yeah, but they're right though. The Netflix Voltron was solid. Did you ever watch the Japanese? The what was it? The Go Beast Lion or Beast King?
No,
Beast.
no, I don't think I've ever seen that. I know it's different. Are we talking about the initial cartoon that they brought over and they changed it so it wasn't as like dark?
Yeah, where they killed
Okay,
off what's his
that's
name in the
Sten.
Japanese version, right? And then the
Yeah,
American version. But it was so popular that they animated a couple of
yeah,
episodes towards the end to get him out of his coma.
yeah,
Not like
yeah.
off
Oh,
screen. It's like, hey,
no,
Duke's okay. Oh man, that's one of my favorite GI like stories about 80s cartoons. They changed the ending because of the Transformers movie to the GI Joe movie, and it
yeah,
was like, yes, they changed the ending, but they didn't change the animation where everybody saw it and just like, oh my god, Duke's dead. But it's like everybody's like crying, going, oh, he's gonna be okay. He's just
yeah.
in a coma.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, at the end of I was never actually allowed to watch GI Joe as a kid because of the guns and stuff.
makes sense. Yeah.
And so that's always been kind of an outlier for me in that it's got all that cool 80s stuff. And I was looking at a lot of GI Joe stuff when I was putting this together and watching some of it. But I never got. I think I got to watch. They ran the GI Joe the movie like one part of it a day for a week, and I was
Mhm.
allowed to watch that for some reason. But that was the first GI Joe I think I'd ever seen, and I think I had one GI Joe toy, which was a shame because I love those toys with the rubber bands and the
The little
pins that
ones,
do
yeah,
the
they were great.
articulation.
Mhm.
But we had one guy that was a paratrooper that my dad had bought for a practical joke, and he needed the parachute that it came with, and he gave us the guy. And I actually made a really awesome version of Rip Hunter from Robotech because they were made
Robotech,
the same way.
yeah. I
That one broke, and I gave him the camouflage pants, and then the torso was Rick Hunter, and I thought that looked awesome.
You
So
Frankenstein Rick Hunter, that's all
I
because they
did.
it was Matchbox that was bringing over the Robo toys, I think, at the
Yeah,
time. They were
it
doing
worked.
that
It worked.
5-inch scale. Yeah, I that was man, Robotech, that was my jam when I was a kid too. That was
Yeah,
another one that they brought
yeah,
over. Carl
yeah.
Mason.
Oh, that was even more cobbled together. I think.
Yeah, there
Uh,
were 3. There were 3
yeah,
different shows to make into one, which was actually
we
pretty
actually had.
genius because as a kid, I don't think I realized it. As an adult, I'm like,
Oh no, yeah.
"Oh, Dana looks a lot different when she's a baby. I just thought she lost her green hair when she became a teenager." Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
It's
Um,
weird. I never got to watch any Robotech as a kid, but I had I forget how this happened, but we found there was a guy that he was like this tall. He was one of the Zentradi, I think was the name of the
yeah, the Centrati were the bad guys. Mhm.
yeah, there were like these bigger guys, and there was this awesome looking green and red guy, and he had this cool looking like cyberpunk bike he came with, and we just found it like on the street somewhere. It was sitting by some
Oh,
garbage,
was
and
this from no,
I'm
that
sorry,
might
go
have
ahead.
been from the movie, because when they
Mhm,
the movie was another one that they brought over that had nothing to do with Macross or
mhm,
any of the other 3 or 2 anime. It was from,
mhm.
what was it called? It was called not Clash of the Bionoids. Megazones 23 is what the anime
Okay,
was called.
that sounds right. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
had researched it later. I was aware it was a Robotech guy,
Yeah. In
without
America,
being
it was
involved in the
licensed as
story.
a Robotech movie. So
Yeah.
the toys, like I think they spliced like 20 minutes of Robo in it or Macross
Mhm.
with Megazone 23, which had nothing to do again with like it's crazy. Uh,
But it was a cool toy. And my mom, I think, made me put up signs that we found this toy and says, if nobody gets back to you in a week, you can keep it. And that was always one of my favorites. That was one of the coolest. I've found pictures of it since. I wish I still had it, but
mhm.
yeah, those were cool looking toys. And a lot of that stuff in the 80s, that the Japanese stuff coming over was so unlike what we were used to. I mean, I loved the
Yeah.
Super Friends, but that was my baseline. To see how those were drawn, like the way Voltron looked, the way they were animated,
Mhm.
that was just such a, I mean, that was like just crazy. I was like, wow, this is amazing. I couldn't believe stuff like that was out there.
With a
And the design.
dash of violence and death, because I
Yeah.
remember Robotech was the first time I saw a character die. Like it was Roy, who was my favorite
Hmm.
character. But I
Hmm.
think Ben got killed first. Ben Dixon got killed first, but then Roy Fokker ended up dying, and
Hmm.
I thought, hey, is he really dead? Like, is he not coming back? And I thought it was really cool to see a continuing story too. Like the
Yeah.
things that happened in a previous episode mattered later on. And I hadn't seen a lot of that in a cartoon. I mean, not even in He-Man or even as much as
Yeah.
I love Transformers, it wasn't like something that happened in season 1, episode 10 affected what happened in
Yeah.
season
Yeah.
2. It was just like, here's a bunch of characters. And then season 2 was like, oh, wait, there were more Cybertronians in the arc. And nobody bothered explaining where the hell they came from. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
but
I think the only continuity in Transformers that I noticed was like just more toys. Like
okay,
the
I mean, that's what,
Constructicons show up and then they're just there for, the remaining episodes, or they'd add a new set. It would just kind of come in. But that was the only continuity it seemed to have to me as a kid.
mhm.
But I was aware of it being kind of having some kind of chronological thing. And then especially once the movie, there was kind of a before and after there.
The movie was like, we're getting rid of the 86 toy
Yeah.
line, and here's the new 87 toy line. Get ready to get your hearts ripped out, kids.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's amazing. Their idea was just like, oh, we just want them to buy new toys. So yeah, kill that guy. They had no idea
yeah.
people were so attached to
Well,
Optimus
and I think
Prime.
that was the difference in the Japanese storytelling, right? In the way
Yeah.
that that was done. And I grew up watching, like I said, Captain Future and Captain Harlock, and there was a lot of that in there too, a lot
Yeah.
of death. Um, and in America, it was like, wow, death really affected kids. Maybe we
Mhm.
should let's think about that GI Joe movie where the snake goes through Duke's body, like
Yeah.
just ripping through his chest.
He got better. But yeah,
This
that's
this is
the
this is really
well
cool. I
it
read the Robotech novels in the 7th grade a few years
oh yeah.
after the show. It was great. The Full Circle, that last novel is phenomenal. Like, I mean, say
Okay.
what people will about Carl Masek. He was, if it wasn't for Carl Masek, like we wouldn't have anime the way that it blew up. It like
Mhm.
it did in the late 90s, early aughts. Like him and his group of, and then eventually Streamline and Power Rangers wouldn't even be a thing, really, because he was the big inspiration for that. It's kind of, it all
Oh
goes back
wow.
to Robotech, man. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's weird. That's like Power Rangers is like where I get off the train where I was like not watching new stuff. I was
Yeah,
just going back
same,
to my
same.
old
But the
stuff.
comics are great. The comics are phenomenal. If
Oh,
you've never,
really? Okay. I've
yes,
seen. I mean, they've done really well on the Boom versions, but yeah, I can absolutely see why it's cool. In fact, it's almost exactly Voltron, really. But
yeah,
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 that's
yeah.
the one I had no like connection to that, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I don't care about the Power Rangers at all. like
I
I think
like.
Ninja Turtles was the last thing I really liked
Oh yeah, that was a
as far as
classic.
those things.
The I think Power Rangers. I like giant robots because that's what I've always enjoyed
Sure.
since I was a kid. So that's what I like, that aspect of the Power Rangers. But I never did watch it. But reading the comics, they're really solid. They're really good.
Mm, I'll check those out. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like what I wanted to do with this was like I love I didn't know that there was even Robotech novels, but I was aware of like how they cobbled stuff together and tried to make it work. And even in doing that, they had some kind of continuity they were working with. I really wanted to do that. Like take in my mind, the August was like a 90 episodes of it were produced in the 80s. It was pretty much just like this sort of back and forth civil war between the rebels and the good guys. And August was like the hero with some of his supporting cast. And I kind of thought, okay, we're going to move it forward a little bit and just advance the story and make him a little bit more mature, a little bit more of like, not like the difference between Indiana Jones and like Empire Strikes Back as far as maturity or darkness or anything like that. But like I wanted to move it forward and give it that sense that it could evolve, that characters are in jeopardy, that it's sometimes they're going to win and sometimes they're going to lose. And that, especially as I've been planning out the other series that are going to go with this one, that's been really fun to do. And it's been fun to look at that old stuff, look at my plan for this, and really like, plan out ways to give you some suspense, to make you like, we have all this nostalgia for these things. We also want to be surprised and see things that are new. And it's been really fun to kind of mix and match. Sometimes you expect this to happen, it's going to go a different direction, and kind of just play with that world and keep the story moving forward. So I hope it's going to be fun to follow along with as people check out this book. I hope people will give it a shot, because I'm going to keep doing stuff with this character, and it's going to be, I think, a really fun ride.
And I have left a link in the description of the video. I've left a link here if you all want to check it out. Comic book readers, we tend to, always say that we want to see new things. So this is definitely something new, but it's definitely a throwback to the things that I know I enjoyed. So I hope, yeah. How many days are left on the Zoop?
I think we have, I think we've been live for 9 days now. So we probably, it's going to go until August 31st. That was their idea. That I think was a good one. It's going to be the August of August here over at Zoop. So it's going to be live until the 31st. And Comics for Life, I have a lot of influences, but I'd say the biggest one is probably Al Williamson, who was a Star Wars artist. Did the comic strip, did a lot of the adaptations, and he was my favorite when I was a kid, and is still probably my favorite artist.
Al Williamson, nice. I can see that. Yeah, I can see that in even the way the composition works on some of the pages now.
Mm-hmm.
But I also see Stuart Immonen in there too.
Yeah, a lot of Stuart Immonen. I'd say practically in a lot of ways, Stuart Immonen is a big influence, because he's almost like Steven Spielberg. He does everything so well. Everything's effective. Everything is done smart. It's efficient. There's still, which is not to say it's like workmanlike or just adequate. It's also, it covers all those bases brilliantly. And yet his drawings are still beautiful. There's just so much there. So I'd say, in a sense, if I'm ever like, how do I do this scene? What kind of layout should I use? I'm going through my Stuart Immonen folder of original, like scans of original art that I've found online, and looking for like, maybe I approach it from this type of angle, because that guy does it, in my opinion, better than anybody.
This is a nice note from Starscream. Sorry I missed the first 20 minutes. Why the name August? And also, thanks so much for doing these videos. We'll also be grabbing a copy or two of this book. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Name
August?
Yeah.
Oh, it's actually the month of my birthday. So it was a placeholder name. I originally wanted to call him Frost for some reason. And there was, I think, an Image comic that came out around the same time that either the main character was named Frost or the story itself was named Frost. So that was out. And I like the name Augustus. It's my birthday month too. So I kind of used August as a placeholder for a long time, and I just got used to it and thought, yeah, this does kind of do everything I need the name to do. I wanted it not just to be a name that was like, just someone's last name or a first name. I wanted it to be a name that's a little bit different, but also is a because of the month itself, is a very recognizable word that you can remember and you have a mental attachment to. So it's a little, I hope, sticky in that way. But that's why I kept it. I kind of started with a placeholder and then realized, hey, this does the job the name needs to do, and kept it for that reason.
Tiny Toons was the very tip off of my childhood. That and Batman Adventures. Grew up with every franchise you guys spoke of. Netflix Voltron is a must watch. It kills. Yeah, my daughter and
Gonna have
I,
to check that out. Yeah.
my
The
oldest and I really liked it, man. It was so good,
Oh,
man.
I knew when I was a kid in the 80s watching
Josh,
Voltron, He-Man, Transformers, I knew how good I had it. I knew that stuff was great. And then I mean, I almost, and probably everyone feels this way, but I almost feel like I was born at the perfect time because right as I was, maybe could have just been more into baseball and phase out of comics and cartoons a little bit. Like Batman the animated series was out, the Batman movies were out. There was just so much stuff that was just the right next step in terms of storytelling and maturity
mhm.
and stuff like that. And every part of it, Tiny Toons was like a really brilliant show. It was really good for what it was doing. Batman the animated series, I
Very,
don't think anyone thinks it's anything less than a complete masterpiece. So
absolutely,
I was
yeah.
really
Tiny
lucky to
Toons was
have all that stuff.
very smart and very witty. Like going back and check it
Yeah.
out. It's funny because like you do that like growing up you'd watch some Looney Tunes, and
Mhm.
man, there's so much adult humor
Oh
in
yeah.
Looney Tunes, like the
Yeah.
things that you didn't catch as a kid, and I like that, and I like when writers do that, and they kind of did that with Tiny Toons. I don't think to
Yep.
the extent of what they were trying to get away with into the original Looney Tunes, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, there's a
Uh,
lot. That and Animaniacs had. I like will see a meme every week. It seems like I had no idea this was an Animaniacs, but it's a pretty adult joke or a bit.
yeah. Um, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about your book. And I love to see it fully funded and have a hard copy of it. It looks amazing, and I want to see you just keep doing. I love when people put everything into their passion, and you know, you have a full time job, and you did this all again, stressing the fact that you did this all on your own,
Yeah.
like writing it, coloring it, drawing it, lettering it, which is just wow. That's amazing, man. That is a feat, and that's mad props to you, dude. So
Thanks.
this is live until August 31st. If you're watching this later, the link is in the description of the video. They have different tiers for the book. There's original artwork there that you can pick up too, and support the book if you can. Any last words, Ben, before we sign off for today?
Not too much. Just thanks for having me on. It's always
My
awesome
pleasure.
to be able to talk about the book. I really like doing that. As far as social media, I can throw some of those into the comments here, and I will as soon as we're done, if I can. But you can find me on Twitter at Benjamin W. Morse. Let me get the exact thing to throw into the comments here.
Let me know if it works or not, and if not,
Yeah.
I'll try to put it in there.
And one thing I'll also throw up here is I have a preview of August. I have 85 pages of the book that you can check out in digital. So we wanted to do this hardcover. Obviously, they cost a lot to put together, but I know that's a big ask, for especially for a new character. And so I wanted to put this pretty long preview up so that you could check out the book, check out some of the extras, and connect to the chat here real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes, go Lions! It's
yeah,
awesome. Don't
might
sleep
have to
on it.
go right to YouTube. Let me do this real quick.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
but I'll throw the link for that and let's see here. All right, just take a second.
So making sure this is the right Ben Morse.
Yeah. All right, there's my Twitter, and I'm going to throw the preview that you can check out in there as well. And like I said, I know it's a big ask to get a hardcover, but I wanted to put a lot of this out there for people to check out. So if you want to go look at that, you can see a lot of the story, a lot of the extras, and see if it's your thing. And if you're into a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, I think you're going to dig it. So give that a look and see if it's for you. I definitely wanted to make that as it's a big. I don't know if I'd say it's a risk necessarily, but it's a big ask to get a hardcover for a new thing, and they haven't really been able to check out. So I just wanted to make that easy for people to take a look at and hopefully like what you see.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us. And I did put it right there. It's just Benjamin W. Morse, his Twitter, if you want to go
Yep.
and follow him. And smash that like button on the way out, everyone. Stay healthy and safe. Have a great day.